Okay, ladies, hi. So I'm going to do my best. You might have to turn up the volume here a little bit because yikes, cold and flu season. But I am going to start actually in a place earlier than I thought I would. So if you go to that outline, it's going to be where it says Section 2, War Erupts in Europe. So we're actually going to talk about how the fighting begins in Europe. And we know that by now Hitler has been going through Eastern Europe. He goes even further, and he does something very shrewd. He is going to sign a non-aggression pact with Stalin. And this is basically his way of saying, hey, Stalin, I won't bother you right now. You don't bother me right now. Now, this is good for Russia, and Russia's going to agree to this. But then you're going to see this allows Hitler just to take on everybody else and not worry at all about that Eastern Front. So really, it's a short-term favor for Russia, but a bad move for everybody else. And then with this ensured, Hitler's going to attack Poland September 1st of 1939. What he does is just insane. This is who we're dealing with. Hitler shot one of his own men, dressed him up in a Polish uniform, and then dragged him on the side between the border of Germany and Poland and said, look, one of your Polish soldiers attacked us first. This is, again, who we're dealing with, this level of madness and this level of evil. So with that ruse in place, he is going to go ahead and attack Poland. And these Polish soldiers have their old kind of beautiful uniforms, and they have their swords. And Hitler comes in with what is called blitzkrieg warfare, just pummeling them, first with the fighter planes overhead and all the bombs, and then when that is cleared away, heavy artillery and tanks, and just in case there's anything left, then foot soldiers. And this comes so quickly, and this is so surprising to Poland, and they don't stand a chance. And now that Germany has occupied Poland, most people are going to say, okay, this is the step too far. This is scary. This isn't a piece of something. This isn't, part of Austria. This is a country of Poland. And people start to react. When you and I talk about the Holocaust, something we will mention is how countries in Eastern Europe suffer the most from what's going on. And that's because Hitler and his men get there first, right? So Elie Wiesel is going to be writing about this in the very famous book Night, which I hope some of you have read, a devastating but very important book to read. And they suffer there the most. It is just devastating. So that's in September of 1939. And what happens next is just terrifying. It's like just, one thing after the other. By September 3rd, Britain and France now declare war on Germany. By April, Hitler easily takes Denmark and Norway. If you guys have ever read the book by Lois Lowry called Number the Stars, this talks about that experience. And then again, easily the Netherlands and Belgium by May. So we're going September, April, May. And by May, he's taken the Netherlands and Belgium, and of course this experience is brought to life by another beautiful but tragic book, The Diary of Anne Frank, who was living in the Netherlands, right, living in Amsterdam at the time. And if we look at Europe and what's left, it's terrifying. Italy and Spain are already fascist, right? The only other countries that are standing, that haven't made some kind of agreement or already been occupied with Hitler, are Britain and France. And clearly by taking Belgium and the Netherlands, Hitler's closest now to France, and France is on the mainland, where Britain is an island. So very soon France is going to fall. An amazing thing happens. Germany invades France very early on, and a lot of French soldiers and people get trapped at this port that is up north called Dunkirk. And I'm sure you have seen Harry Styles and everybody who's in the movie that's coming out. And I'll post that trailer for you. We all saw it when we went to see Hidden Figures. It was a trailer that day. What happens is one of the most heroic events of all of World War II. You have, just across the British Channel, every man in Britain who has a rowing boat, a fishing boat, steamer ships, anything, make these trips back and forth to rescue these men. And it is just incredible. So while you have that really heroic, beautiful moment that happens, and all these lives that get saved of these Allied troops, most of which are French, a lot of which are British, France is going to fall right afterwards. And when they do, they put everything on this Maginot Line. That's what it was called. And they said, Germany will never pass this line. Germany will never pass this line. And Germany goes, broop, they go around it. So all their bunkers, all their guns, everything, they just go around it, and they go through the forest. They come in. France was not expecting this. And in this devastating moment, the Arc de Triomphe, built for Napoleon, Paris, the heart of the city, Hitler has a parade and goes through the Arc de Triomphe. And this is just a slap on the face. This never happened in World War I, this invasive fighting, being in cities, touching a place like Paris, and all of France is captured. It just happened almost overnight. By June, France is completely surrendered to Italy and Germany. And again, they just cannot compete. And occupied France earns the name Vichy France. And when we see occupation happen in every place, we always see this bizarre kind of life that people are going to be living. There's curfews, but you're like still going out to dinner. You're still like dating. You're still raising your kids. Irene Nemirovsky is going to be a beautiful author who writes about this. She writes a book called Sweet Française. And very sadly, she is one of many authors who are going to get their books out of their experience during this war, but then because of their Judaism, they're going to be killed in concentration camps later. But this book is published posthumously, and there's this beautiful chapter where she writes about like how weird it is that the sun is shining, and how bizarre it is that kids are playing, and it's Nazi-occupied France. But life goes on, and if you've ever had any tragedy, it's just baffling how people are like still laughing and going to school, and you've had this tragedy happen to you. And that's for an extended period of time how people in France feel. Something I often pause and think about is, how does Germany teach this? How does France teach this? Because in these countries, especially Germany on a totally different level, you have this very confusing, very proud yet very shameful mixture of what happened, right? This legacy. In France, many people work with the Germans and become part of Vichy France and are going to just like work with the Nazi government, turn in their friends, do what they can to survive. Some people are going to do everything they can to fight the Germans, and they're going to be in the resistance and risk their lives all the time. And die for this cause, and be in the underground of Paris, and taking out Nazi officers, and infiltrating and spying. But the answer is it's both, right? And the answer is that this stuff is working because people are letting it, but it's also being fought because people are fighting back. So it's such a confusing legacy to reflect on. And then that really just leaves us with Britain. So Britain is the only democracy left in Europe. And again, the United States still neutral at this time, the only one left, and the world is waiting with kind of their breath held. What's going to happen? Because if Britain falls, there's no more democracy in Europe, like point blank. And the worldwide repercussions for this, Britain isn't just Britain. Britain has all their colonies in Africa, all their colonies in Asia, all their colonies everywhere, right? In the South Pacific. The ramifications are huge. You would also have all of that be Nazi-occupied territory, right? So Hitler's plan is to use the German Luftwaffe, and the Luftwaffe is going to be just their air force, and the plan is to bomb them as much as possible and just bring the British people to submission. And the Luftwaffe is bigger than the RAF, which is the Royal Air Force, but they don't bring them on their knees. In fact, the British people are going to be amazing. A big part of this is due to radar. Radar is going to be developed in these top secret kind of labs in Great Britain, and they know when the German planes are coming. That's going to be huge. Another thing is Winston Churchill. As people are like, in these blackouts, if you've seen the movie Atonement, I'm going to show you a clip of that. People would be out at night, and they would come home, and their apartment building would just be gone. You had 70 German fighter pilots hitting London alone per night. You have kids who would be in school, and they would say, okay, we think that this area is going to get bombed, and they would be sent to live with a family for the remainder of the war in the countryside. Picture you're leaving at 3 o'clock one day with none of your belongings. You get on a train to live with some host family for the next 4 years. It was just unthinkable what people went through and what people do. But Winston Churchill, very similar to FDR, gives these speeches on the radio inspiring people over and over and over, saying things like never was so much owed by so many to so few, talking about these fighter pilots, what the British people are doing, the British people rationing, having blackout curtains, not using electricity. Women couldn't have nylon because nylon was used as a war material, and stockings back then, everyone wore stockings, like no bare legs, you never did it. Stockings back then always had that line down the center. if you guys know what I'm talking about. And you had women refuse to go out without their stockings or without that appearance. And these women would go out, do their grocery shopping, go to work, do their business, and they would take a pencil or a marker or a piece of charcoal, and they would draw the line down the back of their bare leg so it looked to everybody else like they were still fastidious, all dressed up and ready to take on the world. And when you have that kind of mental framework, Hitler's not going to work, right? And it doesn't. Buildings are so bombed out. London today has so much modern architecture because of this, and there's that threat of death constantly, right? These sirens going off, these air raids, but they do not give up. And Hitler eventually gives up. Hitler is going to push back, and we see this happening. FDR personally is itching to help Great Britain, but can't because we're so isolationist, and we're going to talk about how we get there closer and closer. Tensions in East Asia, by the way, continue. Japan now has just taken China altogether, murdering all these people per day. There's terrible, terrible events that happen, and it's awful, the photos and the pictures and what Japan does to China. And they're going to continue to attack French Indochina, because French is going to be occupying what's called Indochine, which is Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Japan officially joins with Italy and Germany in 1940 to form the Axis powers. So the United States, as you can imagine, watching all this from a distance, terrified, right? And we want to stay out of this mess. Europe is in constant conflict. World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Why on earth would we get involved in this? And everyone from Charles Lindbergh to all these different people are saying, no way, don't do it, stay isolationist, no. And FDR even passes the Neutrality Act in 1935 saying we're going to stay neutral, but how long can we ignore what's going on? How long can we ignore fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, all this stuff? And you even have Americans like Ernest Hemingway volunteering to fight in the Spanish Civil War. And we see a shift. So FDR is going to give what's called the quarantine speech in 1935. And he himself is an isolationist personally, but he can't let people know that, freak them out, right? So he gives this speech and he puts it in a metaphor that inches us closer. He says, we have to quarantine healthy countries in Europe and in Asia and in Africa from the sickness of places like Nazi Germany. It's not an aggressive stand against what's going on. It's not saying we're sending troops, but it's not exactly isolationist when he gives a speech in 1937. Then we start to give weapons to Britain. And when Poland gets attacked, we say, okay, we're not sending troops, we're not sending men, but we come up with the cash and carry policy. And this was meant to slow down what happened. We would basically give our weapons to Britain, they would give us money at the docks, and we would take it back. So this happens, and election of 1940, it's an unstable time. People want familiarity. They vote in FDR again, right? And you're going to see then that's not enough, the cash and carry, because now Britain's running out of money. So we come up with the Lend-Lease Act in 1941, and that says even if you can't pay for them, borrow them. So we start to give them all these weapons, materials, all this stuff. And again, as we do, our economy is going up, 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 because we're making all this wartime stuff. Atlantic Charter, August 1941, FDR and Churchill meet in secret off the coast of Canada in, I want to say, Nova Scotia. Now, we're not officially allies with Britain, but if you're traveling hours to have a secret meeting with someone on a secret boat off a secret coast, sounds like we're getting kind of friendly, right? So we're getting closer and closer. 2 American ships get sunk, the USS Kearney and the USS Reuben, and then, of course, December 7th of 1941, Pearl Harbor. And that's where I'm going to stop because I want to talk about that with you guys. But we now have this, and we're going to be completely in this war. And that's going to start in 1941. All right. Thanks for listening at a very low volume, and I will see you guys tomorrow.